morning. My name is Mike Colacuori, and I want to share a little bit this morning about the Word of God. I didn't say from the Word of God, I said about the Word of God. Did I say good morning? I don't know when you might be watching this. We're recording this in the morning. It's 10:30 or something like that now. If you're watching this in the afternoon, good afternoon. Hey, if you're watching it in the evening, that's all right too. Good evening. Some things change pretty readily. Time can change no matter when you're watching this. My name is Mike Colacuori. Some things don't change and some do. One of those things that does not change is the Word of God. It's been with us since the Nicene Council from 1700 years, and yet there's times we still don't think we understand it. Wouldn't you think after 1700 years that we'd get it right, that we'd be able to understand it? Some things we do and some things we don't. Some things are difficult and some things are easy. Some things we think we understand and yet we don't. What I'd like to do this morning is to explain why we have that difficulty. God intended for us to understand the Bible. He didn't intend for us to have doubts about it. He didn't intend us to not understand it. He wants us to quickly and easily understand the teaching that He has for us. What you might not think about too much is that when the Bible was written, it was not all one book. It was written by many people over many centuries, and it was always written to people that were alive at the time. It was written using the language and culture of the people that they were addressing. That creates differences. Many cultures vary a little bit from one to another, and it affects the way we receive the Word of God. Even as you read the Bible, since it's a compilation written by many people over many different times, they were writing to the people that were alive in their day. They were addressing them, not us. The Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. And since we have our differences, cultural differences, it sometimes shows up in the way we read things, and it creates difficulties. I'm going to try to make it a little bit simple. The Bible is about relationships. The relationship between God and man, first and foremost, and secondly, between people. We see that throughout the entire Bible, and it expresses them, its teachings, in the language of what we call covenant. Covenant is a relationship. Originally, it was a relationship between God and man. It came to be used as a relationship between a great king and a servant king. It was easily understood in their days in the East, the relationship between a servant king and a great king, and it became a good way to express a relationship between God and man. It comes up right away in the Bible and carries on throughout the entire teaching. It first comes up in Genesis 1. Would you believe that? The Bible's main purpose, to teach about covenant, comes up in the first chapter of the Bible. Shouldn't be a surprise there. The Bible is using a method of teaching us in which it uses the visible, the things taking place in the physical world, to teach about things that are taking place in the invisible world. Always the visible is what we see. Always the invisible is the primary subject. The things that it talks about actually did happen. The Garden of Eden was a real place. Adam was a real person. The people you read about in the Bible were real people. God is using the things that happened in their life to teach about the relationship between God and man. God will be speaking through this in the language and culture of the people that it was addressing at the time. in the very beginning. Those differences create confusion for us sometimes because we think in terms of our language and our culture. That's the only vehicle we've got to express things. They were in the same position. They only could express things in their language and culture. We have to bridge the gap when we read the Bible. So when we read it, we have to understand that we are reading the way things were expressed to teach people that were in a different culture than ours. That lens is called covenant. That relationship between God and man is called covenant. There are several elements to it, and I'm going to read them to you. There's 8 elements that make up a covenant relationship. First, the preamble and historical prologue, in which the king identifies himself. He states his name, titles, and maybe his accomplishments, and one or both partners may relate their history. Secondly, there's a territory that's granted. The great king grants a territory to the servant king. There are conditions that must be met by the servant king, the vassal king, and they are known as stipulations. Next, we have sanctions or blessings, blessings and cursings which follow either the keeping or breaking of the covenant. Next, there's an oath that's taken by one or both parties in which they share allegiance to one another. Then there are witnesses to the agreement. There's a sign or a mark about the treaty's existence, and a provision for a permanent record, and both parties got a copy. There would be 2 copies of the covenant. One would be given to the great king, one would be given to the servant king, and the servant king was expected to post it in a public place, and there would be a periodic reading of the covenant. We sometimes don't recognize that when Moses came down from the mountain with the covenant, 2 carved rocks, which he had with him, we think that one complemented the other. We think that part of the covenant elements were on one rock and part was on the other. That was not the way it was. Both parties were to have an identical copy of the covenant, and the covenant would not go into effect until the servant king had received his copy and read it publicly. I don't know if you ever noticed this, but what happened to those articles of the covenant? There was 2 copies of it. They were both placed in the Ark of the Covenant. The servant king didn't have either copy. God kept them both. They were in his presence in the Ark of the Covenant. God had kept them both. That's the beginning of the teaching. What we're going to do in coming lessons, we're going to expand on the relationship of God and man. We're going to open the door to covenant. There's a lot to it that we don't recognize perhaps, and if we can understand covenant, we'll much better understand the Word of God. We'll elaborate on this next time we get together. For right now, you have a good day. Morning, afternoon, or evening. We'll see you later. Thanks for watching.
Wisdom Word TV. Wisdom Word TV. Wisdom Word TV. Truth in time and eternity.